Welcome everyone to Ein Sof Learning. Today we're going to open up the book Derech Hashem, The Way of God, written by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, better known as Ramchal. The Ramchal was a very prominent Italian Jewish scholar, but he was also a Jewish mystic, meaning he was dabbling in the Kabbalah, which is the secret tradition of the Torah that was passed down throughout the generations. But he was knowledgeable in also philosophy. So Jewish philosophy, Jewish mysticism, this was his niche, if you want to say. And he's most famously known for his work, Derech Hashem, The Way of God. So let's begin with chapter 1 on the topic of the Creator. Every Jew must believe and know that there exists a first being without beginning or end, who brought all things into existence and continues to sustain them. This being is God. So let's dissect what we just read. And we're going to do this with everything that we read. We're going to give an in-depth analysis into really breaking apart what these words mean. Because this was translated from Hebrew into English by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, another very prominent scholar in Jewish tradition, especially in Jewish mysticism. He knew Kabbalah as well. I'm learning Hebrew though. We should all be striving to learn it in Hebrew, but that's for another time. So first, he says, every Jew must believe and know that there exists a first being. So notice how he differentiates between the idea of belief and knowledge. That's called emunah and da'at. There's the mitzvah to have emunah, and there's another mitzvah to have da'at, meaning knowledge. Remember, belief is always whenever you don't have knowledge. So it's emunah is only in the absence of da'at. But if you have da'at, if you have knowledge about something, you don't need to believe in it anymore because you now know it. There's no more faith needed to be. It's knowledge. We're not going to get into a debate about what knowledge means, but a very brief explanation that's brought down through the way that, we learn it in the Jewish mystical tradition, is that da'at means connection. It's also meaning connection. Like whenever it says that Adam da'at Chava, that Adam Harishon, the first man. But no, he's not really the first man. Don't fall for these, simplifications, right? We know through science, and we know through also the Torah, that there were other people who existed before Adam Harishon, before Adam the first man. Adam is the first person to become conscious. That's why it says that God blew within him nefesh chaya, a life, soul of living. But for the most part, whenever we're talking about the concept of belief and knowledge, just to get back on track here, is that you cannot believe something if you know it. The goal is to know God, right? That's the mitzvah. That's the big mitzvah. It's to know thy God. It doesn't say believe in thy God. It says da'at. So he makes that distinction here. He says you need to believe, which means that if you don't know, then you have to have emunah. But you should ideally get to a point in time where you can know, where you realize, you have a revelation, you have an awakening, where you know, you experience what it means for there to be this first being. So that there exists this first being. You need to know that there is this first being. Why does he refer to God as the first being? Well, very simple. Because before the world was created, there was only one thing that did exist, which was whatever that thing was that caused it to come into existence. So we call that the first cause. If you want to take a more philosophical or scientific terminology, the first cause. The cause of all effects, but not just the cause of all effects, but the cause of all causes. The thing that existed at the beginning, without beginning or end. So this thing that existed at the beginning always existed, because it didn't have a beginning, which means there was never a point in time, so to speak, that it came into existence. It was just always there. And there was no end, which means that there is no limitation. There is no vessel to this infinite first being. Well, we didn't get to infinite yet. I don't want to bring in words that Ramchal didn't use yet, right? So far, we know that there is a first being, and he has no beginning or end, meaning he's infinite. He's just eternal. And by the way, the name of God is Yud, He, Vav, He. We all know that the Yud, He, Vav, He is a tetragrammaton, the holy, ineffable four-letter name of God. It's ineffable because you're not able to speak this name. You're not allowed to pronounce this name, at least until Mashiach comes, which means until the redemption era kicks in. Right now, we're not living in the era of redemption. Some people believe that soon it's to come, right? And perhaps that's true. But the point is that he hasn't come yet, right? We haven't been redeemed at this moment in time. Therefore, we cannot recite God's true name. Instead, we replace it with Adonai, Aleph, Dalid, Nun, Yud. And you can only even pronounce that name whenever you have a reason to pronounce the name, which means whenever you're studying or when you're praying. But the name of God, Yud, He, Vav, He, can actually be divided into 3 words. Haya, Hove, Yihyeh. Was, is, and will be. This name actually speaks to the eternality of Hashem. He always was, always is, and always will continue to be. So that is what Ramchal is telling us here, without beginning or end. Now continuing. Who brought all things into existence and continues to sustain them. So this first being that doesn't have a beginning or end brought all things that exist into existence. Everything that exists by extension from this first being. As long as you have a connection to this first being, then you continue to exist. That's why it's called the tree of life. Because it's a tree of life to those who cling on to it. For those who hold on to this tree, even though the leaf might be dead and it's not living and it's not green and colorful, as long as it's connected to the tree, it still has a chance, and therefore it still exists. But the moment that leaf disconnects from the tree, it's on its own. It's going to blow in the wind. Whatever comes, whatever goes, goes. There's no more sustenance flowing to the leaf from the trunk, from the roots, from the water, from the sunlight. No more. We are discontinued. And He's no longer sustaining that tree or that branch or that leaf, whatever you want to call it. So that's a very important concept. So as long as we keep our connection to the tree of life, meaning the Creator, then we will continue to live, we will continue to exist, our soul will be continued into the creation, but even more than that, we'll always have a chance to reach our potential, and we always are given the opportunity to reach our potential. But look at how He says, He continues to sustain them. So, this being called God continues to sustain them. That means that the act of creation is not a one-time act. It's a continuous act of creation, meaning that every interval of time in this world is actually a new creation. God is constantly renewing this creation throughout every single interval or fraction of our space and time. Because the light of God, as we've learned on our channel before, there's a difference between God and the light of God. But the light of God is constantly flowing into this world. Therefore, it's constantly sustaining the creation. It is furthermore necessary to know that God's true nature cannot be understood at all by any being other than Himself. So, God is so endless, He's so beyond comprehension, that there's not even a single being that exists that can fully comprehend what He's all about, other than His own self. Only God can understand Himself in His entirety. Let's continue. The only thing that we know about Him is that He is perfect in every possible way and devoid of every conceivable deficiency. So He says there's only one thing that we know about this being that we just described that we called God. There's only one thing that we know about God. Perfect. Perfect means that He's devoid of every conceivable deficiency. No lacks, no limitations, no borders. Nothing is impossible for this being. He is perfect in every conceivable and inconceivable way. These things are known by tradition from the patriarchs and prophets. With the revelation at Sinai, all Israel perceived them and gained a clear grasp of their true nature. They then taught them to their children, generation after generation, until this very day. So that gives a little bit of awareness to who the Jewish people are. They are descendants from a people that originated long, long ago, thousands of years ago, where there was a revelation on Mount Sinai, on a mountain somewhere in the east, of Yud He Vav He, which is the name of God, to this nation of people of 600,000 men. Really, there was 2 million people present at the occasion, if you count the women, the children, and the elderly. But there were 600,000 men that were fit to receive this revelation on Mount Sinai, who all got a clear grasp of this perfection that we've just described that exists within God. They were all revealed this perfection of God. And we were even commanded by the Torah in Devarim 4:9, which means Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9, "You shall not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, and you shall make them known to your children and to your children's children." Therefore, all the Jews that exist in the world today are carrying this tradition. They are continuing the legacy of the patriarchs. These concepts can also be logically verified by demonstrable proofs. That means that if you advance the wisdom of science, you'll be able to derive this information as well. Their veracity can be demonstrated from what we observe in nature and its phenomena. Through such scientific disciplines as physics and astronomy, certain basic principles can be derived, and on the basis of those principles, clear evidence for these concepts can be deduced. We will not occupy ourselves with this, however, but we will rather set forth the well-known basic principles handed down by tradition. These we will present in an authentic framework arranged in a comprehensive manner. So he says, all of the things that we've stated so far can be not easily, but he says it could be derived from looking out into the natural world. In fact, that's how Abraham, the patriarch, derived the awareness that there was one God. Right? Abraham is considered to be the first Jew, or the first monotheist, because he was the first person and the only person in a world full of idol worship. He said that look at how many powers there are in the world, because at that time spirituality and the upper worlds and angels and these types of things were revealed around Abraham's time. So he said, look at all of these different spiritualities and these different groups and theories and religions and etc., etc. There has to be one that created all of this. There has to be one being that's superior to all of these creations that brought those things into existence. Because if they exist, then they came from somewhere. And cause and effect tells us that every effect has a cause. So I see an effect, I see this world. So there has to be something that caused it. Whatever that is, that's God. That's the true all-powerful God. And that's exactly how Abraham derived the oneness of God, and that's why Ramchal says here that it is able to be deduced by looking into nature that there is in fact a first being. 3. It is also necessary to know that God's existence is imperative. It is absolutely impossible that he should cease to exist. So God's existence is necessary, meaning that he can't will himself out of existence. Look at this. It's almost as if we're placing a limitation on God. But no. In fact, the fact that he exists speaks at the necessity of his existence. Because if he didn't exist, then he didn't need to exist. But the fact that he exists means that it was imperative that he exist. God existing is not a choice. He always existed and he's always going to continue to exist. He exists outside of the framework of time and space. He transcends all notions of cause and effect. Therefore, the way that we think, something has to come into existence from somewhere, doesn't apply to this first being, because he was the source from which all creations and all effects came from. 4. It is furthermore necessary to know that God's existence does not depend on anything else at all. His existence is intrinsically imperative. So God doesn't depend on anyone. He doesn't depend on anything. Remember, we said that from him comes the rest of the creation. He didn't come from anywhere. He always existed. People ask the question, where did God come from? Who created God? That question demonstrates a lack of understanding of what God is. To ask the question, where did God come from, means that the person doesn't understand that the definition of God, the only thing we know about God, is that he is the eternal first cause of all causes. Now, we don't understand it. By no means am I trying to simplify this phenomenon that this is what exists. Not at all. It's extremely difficult to understand how there could be something eternal Why have there be something rather than nothing? That's a deep philosophical question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Shouldn't there just be nothing? But so here we have it. There was actually something. At the beginning, there was Ein Sof. So thank you so much for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one.